de Catalonia. Mr. González Abalet, you have the floor for 10 minutes.
Hola, buenas tardes y gracias por invitarme.
Thank you very much for inviting me to take part in this committee of inquiry. I feel obliged to explain in as much detail as possible an international journalistic investigation in which the Periodico de Catalonia and other Russian and Italian media have participated, as well as the organized crime and corruption reporting project, the OCCRP, and Bellingcat have collaborated. These investigations have been carried out in parallel to a legal process carried out by the Court of Instruction Number 1 in Barcelona, led by Magistrate Joaquin Aguirre. The facts I will be relating have been verified and accredited through various sources of information and documents. They're not opinions or fabrications. They are events that are part of the Catalan pro-independence process and the internationalization of this conflict with the Spanish state. As you will see, they are objective data and in many cases acknowledged by one or more of the protagonists. The articles have been subjected to demanding fact-checking by the OCCRP, which is one of the most demanding in the world. The opportunity was always given to the protagonists the opportunity to provide their story. They denied to do this. These are simply facts. As a journalist, I only describe the facts. I aware that there are still unknowns to be solved. It's up to the political and judicial spheres who have the responsibility to assess the facts. Now, the research. In 2016, Judge Joaquin Aguirre opened an investigation into the alleged diversion of public funds through subsidies to entities in the pro-sovereignty orbit. Included in there was Catmon, a foundation from Victor Tarradellas, who is a former head of international relations for the Nationalist Party Convergencia Democrática de Catalunya. He is a person who was close to the head of the Catalan government then. He has numerous international contacts. In May 2018, Mr. Tarradellas was arrested in a police macro operation in which Catmon's headquarters were searched. Amongst the documents seized by the police were, in addition to documents on the independence and an eventual Republic of Catalonia, there was a note with Markov's name. The Periodico de Catalunya, through myself and the newspaper's correspondent in Moscow, were able to determine that Markov could be Sergei Markov, a former pro-government deputy and political scientist well connected in the Kremlin. Our newspaper's correspondent in Moscow managed to get an interview with him and explained that in 2017, in talks that were held in Moscow, Tarradellas had offered him recognition of the annexation of Crimea by the Catalan government in exchange for Russia's support for the independence. Markov's response, however, was not positive. Then now we can move on to further indices of possible connections. These are mobile messages on the 25th and 26th of October 2017, days before the unilateral declaration of independence in Catalonia. Tarradellas exchanged a series of text messages with Carles Puigdemont, who was at the time president of the Generalitat. As recorded in the legal case court in Barcelona, the messages are as follow. I'll only mention a few of them. At 5 o'clock, Putin's emissary was coming, he wrote on the 26th. Tarradellas wrote to Puigdemont in a message. On the 25th of October 2017, a series of meetings took place in the Palau de Generalitat. Nerves are on edge. Puigdemont hesitates between calling regional elections or opting for a unilateral declaration of independence, which is what he did in the end. At 10:05 a.m. of the 26th, the president receives a phone call from Terradellas, who a few weeks earlier in September had traveled to Moscow. President, this is Mikhail, another friend of Mr. Puigdemont. Victor and I are meeting with these people, and they'll get back to us in 24 hours. And first, they will also check, one, that China will also say its piece, and that Friday, before doing anything, you need to have a video conference with PU, which, according to the Guardia Civil, stands for Putin. This possibility of a conference was in fact confirmed by Terradellas subsequently before the judge. Now, on China, according to the documentation found by a different court during the preparation for the unilateral referendum on the 1st of October, that the Generalitat planned to present Catalonia as an independent state to the Chinese government. And there was a possibility of a negotiated loan of up to 11 billion euros from the central bank for an independent Catalonia, but that never came to fruition. In the rest of the messages, Puigdemont didn't respond to that message. On the next day, Puigdemont decided to renounce the DUI and call autonomous elections. President Puigdemont responds, and Terradellas says, I'm sorry, you haven't even listened to us. I think we deserved it. Everything was going ahead, and I think we could have made a last-minute rush. It's pity. And at that point, Puigdemont does respond. I didn't have any more margin, and the scenario was devastating for Catalonia. And there are still messages going back and forth and at the end, Terradellas insists that Puigdemont should meet with us. You have to bear in mind that the next day, the unilateral Declaration of Independence was approved, and next day they applied Article 155 of the Constitution, and the central government intervened in the powers of the Generalitat. Now, regarding these meetings, in Tarradellas' phone, the recordings were found of two conversations with the independentists. They were recorded on the 14th and 16th of May of 2018 and dealt with two subjects: the possibility of setting up a system of cryptocurrencies and an alleged offer by Russia to help complete the independence of Catalonia. They also said that 3 days before the unilateral declaration of independence, the head of a Russian group that had contacted in relation to the platform of cryptocurrencies offered Puigdemont, and it says in these conversations that they could count on Russian soldiers and they would pay all of the Catalan doubt. And according to Terradellas, he says in Catalan, and I'm sorry, that he's going to shit his pants. And that is the exact expression used in the recording. Now, with regard to that meeting, the journalistic investigation corroborated that on the 26th of October 2017, when all of these messages were flying back and forth, that on flight 2514, an air flight from Moscow, one Nikolai Sadovnikov, 64, traveled to Barcelona. He was a mysterious Russian ex-diplomat and hypothetical businessman. The Russian national and his compatriot Sergei Motin and the Catalan Jordi Sardar Bonaví, who was implicated in an alleged scam involving a gas sale to Ukraine, held a meeting with Puigdemont at the Casa del Canonges. All of this happened before the Declaration of Independence. And this was confirmed by Tarradellas, who took part in the meeting, in which, in his version, they offered the then Catalan president economic aid and allegedly worth millions of dollars. In exchange, the Russians asked for a favorable legislation to be, set up a cryptocurrency system in Catalonia. But who is this Sadovnikov? He has experience, a fairly extensive experience in the diplomatic world. He served in Rome for the Soviet Union and in Milan for Russia, at least until 1995. According to the Russian Foreign Ministry records, his name is listed as an advisor in a Department of Foreign Policy Planning in 2007, and he was close with members of the Duma. The journalists who participated in this investigation, we were able to read and take note of a European intelligence agency that said that he was known as an unofficial link for contacts in Moscow, and in fact he only reported to the head of state. He is involved with Syria, Iran, Libya, bilateral relations with Russia and the Gulf. These contacts between them were such that they traveled to Moscow and met with Sadovnikov. And it's true that he was in Barcelona, but Tarradellas said that, well, yes, I don't know who we actually met with because I don't speak Spanish. I was there to simply visit a friend. In asking if we provided a photo he could recognize Mr. Puigdemont, he said that, well, he lost his memory because of COVID. And that's where it ended. These meetings of the alleged Russian emissaries were confirmed by the judge, by El Sartadi, who was a person of confidence to the then president and has now disconnected from politics. And this group of Russians even managed to meet with her to discuss cryptocurrencies. In the legal investigation, there were documents found on Tarradellas and conversations with various pro-independence leaders. And amongst those that were arrested was Joseph Luis Alay, who's the current head of Puigdemont's office. According to these messages, again, we saw a close relationship with businessman Alexander Dmitrikento, a resident of Barcelona who was denied Spanish nationality by the Ministry of Justice due to his alleged connections with the Russian intelligence services, which is something he denies. And the judge opened an investigation, which was then closed, on a contract or a deal to sell gas or oil from a Russian company to a Chinese company, and this was eventually closed by the judge due to the impossibility at that time of actually investigating the case in Russia. The Guardia Civil did link Dmytrenko as someone who was in the Puigdemont's circle. But the Dmytrenko connection with Ale goes further. He accompanied the head of Puigdemont's office, according to certain sources, traveled to Moscow several times to seek support for the pro-independence cause. He met with journalists and other personalities of the country, but he claimed this was for academic reasons, to give lectures. Dmitrenko himself acknowledged before the judge that he accompanied Ale to Moscow on two occasions. In a report, Guardia Civil picked up on the news that the Russian media, that the business dealings of Dmitrenko and Artyom Lukyanov, they founded a company in London, who was adopted son of Vladislav Surkov, who was called the Grey Cardinal, who was a mysterious, influential former advisor to Russian President Vladimir Putin's personal staff, who was dismissed in February 2020. Dmitrenko acknowledged the group of investigated journalists that there was this connection. According to, among the people that I met in Moscow was Evgeny Primakov, a former member of the Foreign Affairs. He met with internationals in the State Duma.
Can you conclude soon, because it's already 5 minutes late, so please.
Sí, thank you. También con
So they also met with Sergei Suvin, former commander of the Russian Federal Protection Police, Artyom Lukyanov, who's the current chief, Andrei Bersukov, and his wife Elena Vavilokov. Ale also translated one of his books into Catalan, which he says got him to the Russian capital afterwards. Thereafter, there were also meetings between Puigdemont and Alai, and there clearly you could see that there were leaders in the independence movement who had close relations with Russia, and specifically Alai also tells Puigdemont that we have a complicated situation in Puigdemont, a complicated triangle, where he also talks about Snowden, Lukashenko and Navalny. He also refers to other personalities, and then he says that I recommend that for the moment you don't say anything about Navalny, nothing is clear. That's what he says to Puigdemont. And therefore, thereafter, they also have messages on Alai's mobile phone between others and the Russian journalists as well. So basically what I've tried to do today is to explain the facts as they exist. Of course, there's still a lot to uncover, and sorry about being a bit too long on this.
Merci à vous. J'aimerais...
Thank you very much. I would like to immediately give the floor to Mr. De Pedro, Senior Fellow at the Institute for Statecraft in London, a member of the Experts Pool on Russia and Hybrid COE, and of course a regular within our committee already. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And it is always a big honor and responsibility to contribute to your work and discussions. I have a presentation, but I cannot see. I guess you can see it either.
We can see it.
You can see my presentation?
Yes, on the right side. Yeah.
Okay, but I cannot see. Okay. So, okay, that's great. Thank you very much. So let's keep it there for a moment, because let me start saying that, and I will complement what has been said by Jesus Albalat, that the Russian meddling in Catalonia has been so far widely neglected and misunderstood. A very typical analytical mistake was to question why would Russia support the secessionist movement if they are against them internally. Well, it is not a normative intervention. It is not based on a specific reading or understanding of the situation in Catalonia or the legitimacy or not of its pro-independence movement. The Catalan crisis is or was attractive to the Kremlin because it had the potential to destabilize an important EU member and a NATO ally. Therefore, the Russian interference was opportunistic and strategic at the same time. Russia tried to exploit the crisis created by the Catalan secessionist movement, but also to a degree that we are not yet able to determine. Russia aimed at influencing events on the ground, in other words, generating effects or shaping the context. And the more we know, the more we see a typical pattern of a Russian operation, and I would say also a highly ambitious one. That means multiple simultaneous strands of intervention with multiple and different actors involved, from officials and intelligence operators, as Mr. Albalat was describing, to Russian geopolitical entrepreneurs and all kinds of proxies and fellow travelers. That includes a strong and consistent narrative promoted by the Russian mainstream media in Russian and other languages. And now, next slide, please, which has a video embedded, so I hope we can see it.
Испанские флаги жгли, но вот теперь уже жгут даже испанские паспорта.
Интернет-сайты блокируются, это просто настоящая такая широкомасштабная цензура, сотни уже интернет-сайтов заблокированы.
Все это теперь, конечно, очень сильно напоминает гражданскую войну. Что будет? Какими будут ответные меры Мадрида? Ну что они, как они будут подавлять эти радостные настроения, не знаю, танки?
And the next one, please, is also a short clip.
Госдепартамент США назвал Каталонию неотъемлемой частью Испании и заранее поддержал любые меры Мадрида. Меры, мы понимаем, что могут быть самые жесткие.
Мы принимаем конституционную сторону. Мы на стороне закона. Что это означает? Это означает, что они дают определенный карт-бланш Мадриду проливать кровь.
Уж наверняка не может прогрессивная Европа до сих пор не найти во всем происходящем в Каталонии руку Москвы.
Thank you. So, as you can see, the coverage was biased and in some cases utterly false, sensationalistic, announcing violence and imminent civil war. Next slide, please. Yeah. And here you can see the kind of coverage, and also the next one, please. Here also, the typical, here you can see how they are saying that countries that have shown some kind of official support to the Catalan independence. Next slide, please. We also had, this was back in October 2017, so we also had public figures widely considered as linked to the Russian intelligence services like Julian Assange or Edward Snowden becoming very active on social media, spreading secessionist narrative. These are graphs of Twitter traffic. Next slide, please. Again, and WikiLeaks also highly involved in this. You see the top four influencers over those days in the Catalan or in the media ecosystem around and in Catalonia, which is, I think, very telling. Next slide, please. We also had very public known figures as the late Vladimir Zhirinovsky, known basically for testing the waters for the Kremlin, and who became suddenly very much interested in and favorable to the Catalan succession. Here you have a picture of him leading a demonstration in front of the Spanish consulate in Moscow in November 2017, demanding the freedom for Catalonia and for the peoples of Spain. And 2 years later, in November 2019, he publicly offered political asylum in Russia to Mr. Puigdemont. Next slide, please. We also have another interesting character, who is Alexander Ionov, the leader of the so-called anti-globalization movement, who invited Catalan separatists to participate in two conferences in Moscow in September 2015 and 2016. And he's also, there are suspicions that he is a member of the Russian military intelligence, the GRU. He was very active internationally. Next slide, please. In countries like Iran, Venezuela, and Libya. Next slide, please. Yes, thank you. And he was also part of the group working for having Maria Butina sent back to Moscow. Next slide, please, where we can see it. When she arrived to Moscow airport, you can see Mr. Ionov on the right and Mrs. Saharova on the left of the image. And interestingly enough, Mr. Ionov later on appeared as the lawyer of two Russian hackers who were arrested in Barcelona in January and in April 2017. One of them suspected to have been part of the infamous Fancy Bear group, and the two hackers were later on extradited to the US. Next slide, please. Another curious and interesting development was the visit on the 26th of October 2017 That means around the days of this unilateral and legal declaration of independence of Catalonia. So the day before that, the so-called Minister of Foreign Affairs of South Ossetia, Dmitry Medvedev, traveled to Barcelona for allegedly opening a South Ossetian embassy, and he declared his readiness to recognize the independence of Catalonia. Next slide, please. Here you can see a letter sent by the so-called Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the People's Republic of Donetsk, that's to say an artificial entity run by the Russian intelligence services, that was sent in November 2015, so 2 years ahead of all these events. They sent this letter to the CUP party, which is a far-left pro-independence Catalan party, proposing the establishment of bilateral relations between Donetsk People's Republic, the DNR, and Catalonia. Next slide, please. Here you can see Mr. Victor Terradellas, who Mr. Jesus Albaraz has been referring to, so I will not go into details. Next slide, please. There's another picture of him at the parliament. Jesus Albaraz has already explained about his, in significant detail, about his activities. So just let me add that over this period, a significant number, over these years from 2016, till 2020, but in particular in the first 2 years, 2016 till 2018, a significant number of GRU operators have been identified or were identified in Barcelona. It is highly likely that these people or these individuals were members of the same unit or units carrying out different attacks across Europe, in the UK, Czech Republic, Montenegro, and others. And what they were doing in Spain is not yet entirely clear, but according to several informed sources I have consulted with, the number of troops and operators deployed is a clear indication that they were running an operation whose goals are, as I said, still unclear. I will only add also to what has been said by Jesus Albaraz, that this individual, that Mr. Josep Lluís, right hand of Mr. Puigdemont, the guy that he was meeting or in touch with, Yevgeny Primakov, the grandson, I don't remember now, of the well-known, famous Russian politician diplomat. This Yevgeny Primakov is the head of Rasatrudnichestvo, which is the Russian Federal Agency for Compatriots Living Abroad, and is also widely considered as a cover-up for intelligence activities. And something that is also important to have in mind is that according to from sources from the Catalan pro-independence or within the pro-independence movement in Catalonia, the Russians were very proactive in pursuing links with the Catalan government or the Catalan movement and its whole ecosystem of organizations. And since the very beginning, the Catalan parties and those holding power in the Catalan government, they were divided about this. There were those rejecting these supports at the very beginning, and there were others who strongly embraced this support. Next slide, please. Of course, Mr. Puigdemont was among those who clearly were clearly open to embrace this Russian support, though he has always rejected any relation. As you can see on the street, according to him, everything was just an invention of the Spanish Guardia Civil or the Spanish intelligence services, the CNI. Next slide, please. And as a recent example, you can see here an article that he published in March this year, so 2022, on La Vanguardia, which is the main newspaper in Catalonia, in which he rejected once again any foreign interference, and specifically and explicitly, next slide please, he rejects any meeting with anyone representing the Russian Federation under any capacity. However, thanks to investigations, to the one that Jesus Albaraz was part of, led by Antonio Vaquero from the OCCRP, have proved that these connections were very relevant. Next slide, please. And there, as Jesus Albaraz has been explaining, it was possible to identify this individual, Nikolai Sadovnikov, a former Russian diplomat, who is considered by one European intelligence service, as a prominent member of Putin's parallel diplomacy. And I think this is quite important, and the places where he has been spotted. And it's also important, or I will add only to what Jesus Alvala has said, that I will only say that these European intelligence services who consider this person as a prominent or a key or high-level member of this Putin's parallel diplomacy is not the Spanish service and nor British service, is a third one or another one. Finally, next slide, please. As the evidence about this meeting was hard and conclusive, Mr. Puigdemont had finally to acknowledge that these meetings took place. And this is when they in April or in May, sorry, so just barely 1 month and a half after he published this piece saying that he never met anyone talking on behalf of the Russian Federation. He had to acknowledge that, yes, actually he met him, but this is a news that was published at the Catalan public news agency, Agencia Catalana de Noticias. But now the new narrative, after being for 5 years saying that all was false and invention of the Spanish services or Spanish journalists or think tankers like me or others. So after 5 years denying everything, he finally acknowledged that, okay, these meetings, yes, took place, so we had all these meetings running. But the new narrative is that, yes, I met these people, but I refused their offers. Well, I don't know, but the day after this meeting took place, he sent his number two back then, Ms. Sartadi, to meet again with the Russians. And later on there were other meetings and other interactions highly suspicious. So more research, investigation and actions are clearly required to find out what it seems as an operation that was, as I said, ambitious, with multiple strands, with multiple and different actors involved, which is a typical pattern of Russian operations abroad nowadays. Thank you very much.
Thank you. La parole est désormais aux membres. Nous sommes...
I now give the floor to members. We're running very late, so I will be very strict indeed in terms of speaking members. 4 members. We'll start with Mr. Zalejos for the EPP.
Gracias.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be speaking Spanish as a speaker. It is not at all my intention to talk about internal Spanish issues. I'm just here to talk about the facts. The fact that there was collusion between the independentist groups in Catalonia and Russian authorities. Now, maybe for some people who were listening, this seemed like a story, a piece of fiction. But what is really serious is that all of this is fact. It really happened. The massive disinformation that Russia has deployed was real. The attempt to use media like Sputnik and Russia Today to just fabricate content and to spread them was real. The exchanges, meetings, trips, and to actually have exchanges between the independentists and Moscow were real. This is what then preceded the unconstitutional unilateral declaration of independence on the 1st of October. Russia offered military support, economic support. They were willing to recognize the fictitious Republic of Catalonia. The Russian insurgents would never have worked without its interference, and it's really an embarrassment how far they got. Wherever there is a conflict, I think Russia will be there to add fuel to the fire. Why was Russia interested in supporting the independence movement? Firstly, it wanted someone to support its annexation of Crimea as a legitimate act. Putin himself has explained that in the same way as the West supported the independence of the ex-Soviet Union republics, Europe should now pay for the support in the form of destabilization of secessionist movements. So these are also the instruments used by the insurgency. And all of these instruments used by Russian insurgents were deployed in Catalonia. So what are the conclusions that we should draw from these facts? Well, I'm looking at the facts, I'm looking at the evidence, and I have a short question for Jesus Albalat. His contribution together with Mr. Pedro was very interesting, and thank you very much to both of them. Now, Mr. Albalat talked about unknowns and pending investigations. Of course, we might not have the answers, but what are the questions we should be asking to seek the necessary clarity in this work and in this issue? Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you very much. And I'll give the floor to Mr. Sanchez Amor for S&D.
Gracias, Rafael.
Thank you very much, Rafael. This question of the wiretaps and message they talked about, there are two questions that I would like to raise. Spain would not exist, nor would Europe. And then it said that this is how we talk about Catalonia. Now, this contention to not really criticize Russia, this is something that were providing cover for these contacts with Russia. So for Russia, there's just one agenda, destabilizing and dividing. This is basically what they're trying to do, to create a new narrative in Europe and to say that Europe is at collapse. They're not trying anything else. That's their end game. But clearly here there's much more than this information. There's direct interference facilitated by the incredible acts by some authorities and members in Mr. Puigdemont's close circle. You have high-level emissaries of Putin intervening in a country, trying to destroy a constitutional system, to willing to recognize a future hypothetical Republic of Catalonia. No one can pretend that they did not know the consequences of these actions. This was not something unknown, or this was something that was carried out knowing what the outcome would be. And this just further strengthens the need to defend Spanish democracy is in light of such facts. It's not something that they did not know. This is basically going in with your eyes open, knowing exactly what would be the outcome, and the secessionists use this to their advantage. And this is something where they put a European Union member state in play. It doesn't matter that it was peaceful measures, legal or illegal, difficult or simple. Everything was allowed for this independence movement. However, Russia did not succeed in this attempt. Thanks to the strength of the Spanish democracy, in spite of its failings, thanks to the support of the European Union, they did not succeed. And I think we need to learn lessons from this. We have to keep a very close eye on things. And now with the war in Ukraine, it seems that finally we are giving things that have already been happening for a long time its due attention. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you very much. And now for Renew, Ms. Pagza Ortundua. Thank you very much. I'll start with the end of the last speaker. Now, we have to learn lessons. Now, firstly, to learn these lessons, we need to do what something Kalinsky said. We need data and we need a case study. The case of Catalonia is so serious. Everything that we've seen, everything that is being revealed, everything that is yet to be revealed, it is so serious that it goes way beyond disinformation. It even goes beyond interference, because here we're talking about massive disinformation to basically destroy public opinion, and that's been ongoing since 2016. We're talking about Kremlin agents in Barcelona for a long period of time. We're talking about close ties between the president of the Generalitat and the Catalonian government, and with many actors in Putin's inner circle, to destabilize and to instill chaos and to install division and basically bloodshed in Spain. It's only now that the reality is coming to light, but what did you think 4 years ago? Perhaps most of you believed this information that was just spreading everywhere. Now, truth was lies and lies was truth. Nobody knew the difference. But clearly, serious crimes were being committed behind all of this. And if everything actually had exploded, this would have just destroyed public opinion in European institutions and in the EU. The European Parliament has twice approved the idea that this case needs to be studied in depth. Mr. Kalensky has also said that we need case studies, and this is the perfect case study. And this is something that could reveal modus operandi that Russia deploys in other cases as well. Now, my questions, and also to the experts and the people who are listening to us. Now, if we're asking the Helsinki Institute against hybrid threats and other such institutions to study such a case, and if we want in-depth information and to figure out how hybrid threats affect and destabilize the EU, then we would in fact be moving ahead on something the Parliament has asked for. However, when we were in Helsinki, one of the experts said that we saw a map where we had different parts of Europe that are being attacked by Russia, and Catalonia was one of them. And when we're talking about grey areas, I always like to ask the experts, according to Mr. Massar, when we're talking about these grey zones or hybrid threats, they talk about political objectives, using ambiguity, using mainly non-military tools to basically attack vulnerabilities, and in a way also finding a way to escalate existing conflicts. All of these points were highlighted by Mr. Massar, and all of this is seen in the so-called grey areas that Russia is focusing on. This was seen in Catalonia, and some things were even worse in Catalonia. So my question is the following. Can we do something to ensure that this case study could actually help us and could then end up in conclusions or recommendations for our committees? Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you very much. I have a question as well. Now, one of the arguments that the people involved have actually developed, they said that the courts have given up on this case. Is that true? Is there a possibility, according to Spanish law, for citizens to get involved or to complain against foreign insurgents? How exactly does all this play out, legally speaking? That would be my question. And now I'll hand back to you, Mr. Al-Balad, for 5 minutes.
Hola.
Good evening once again. Now, starting with the questions, I was asked about the unknowns that still need to be revealed. Now, firstly, the investigation is still ongoing, the journalistic as well as the legal investigation, as well as by the Guardia Civil. The open-ended questions are the following. For example, on a legal scale, it has not been possible to study the mobile phones of all the independent movement leaders that were arrested. We also don't have the mobile phones of some of the people who were involved in the wider circle related to Puigdemont. And so some of these devices have still not been studied. And based on what I have understood, this information will reveal contact with a number of other independence movement leaders, will also reveal a number of other trips to Moscow, and especially will also reveal contacts with specific well-known individuals who have been involved in disinformation campaigns. For example, it would reveal certain meetings that would also have taken place with Mr. Assange while he was in the UK. That's on one hand. And furthermore, there are other points to be investigated as well. We also have the so-called democratic tsunami. Now, the democratic tsunami is a protest movement. It's a citizens' movement to create a Catalan republic. So this is still open as well. And we're still investigating that movement. There are other investigations that are still open as well. Some of them are very complicated. Even though some more data collection can take place, it's still quite complicated based on what the MEPs said. As the fact that we have the group present, and that is very difficult, and the fact that there were also Kremlin close circle members also in Barcelona just before the unilateral declaration of independence, and some of them were also present in autumn of 2016. And now in terms of the crimes themselves, as journalists, I think we have to stick to the facts. And we have the facts. But of course, it's also true. And all of this is still yet to be approved. We do have some facts, but let's see if something more is done. That's the million-dollar question, really. According to Spanish criminal law, international insurgents and interference, be it Russian or others, can actually be tried as a threat to state security. There is a criminal case for something like this. However, it's only if this interference has created or provoked some sort of result, and that's quite difficult. And I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur De Pedro.
Thank you. Mr. De Pedro, you now have some time to respond to the questions as well.
Muy bien, pues muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much for all the questions and comments. I'll be very brief to Mr. Zarzalejos.
I think your sound is too weak, and therefore you have to speak in English because there will be no translation.
Okay, no problem. No problem. I switch into English. So, thank you very much to Mr. Zarzalejos. I was saying that there are dozens of strands of intervention or dozens of clues that have not been properly investigated so far. One of the main ones is, as Jesus Alvarado was saying, is the activity of all these GRU officers identified and spotted in Barcelona over these years. So a lot more needs to be done and research. And the more research and the more investigations are conducted, the more evidences are compiled and are gathered. So I'm sure that we will come to know much more, and it will be much more worrisome than what it looks like right now. To Mr. Nacho Sanchez Amor, many thanks for your comments, and I can only fully endorse and agree. Democracies have the right to defend themselves and must defend themselves against this kind of heinous attacks. And to Mrs. Pagazartundua, I think that your proposal is honestly excellent, and it will be great. And the hybrid COE will be the perfect place to conduct such a case study, and definitely will be very, very interesting, because it's a very interesting case study for many others, not only for Spain. For Spain is very important, of course, but it can be, the lessons learned can be useful for anybody else. And also it allows us or everyone to compare different patterns of different interventions, different operations, and to find out patterns, which is what is very important. So I can only fully really support your proposal for this investigation. And finally, to Mr. Glucksmann, many thanks also for your question. And I'm not an expert on law, but I can say that certainly it seems to me that when these kind of laws were designed or written, the context was very different, and are really, in many regards, are very outdated. And the result is, as Jakub Kalinski was saying over his first intervention, that in many occasions, definitely those adversaries are getting the message. The message they are getting is basically that we are defenseless and we are doing little or almost nothing against this kind of attacks or aggressions. So I think is this kind of upgrading and updating legislation is a very important element to fight against this foreign interference and malign influence and disinformation at large. So it's definitely one very relevant element. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. Merci à nos invités pour...
Thank you very much to our guests for the excellent interventions, and thank you for all of you for participating in today's session. We'll be back in 3 to 4 minutes, where we'll take on the topic of the Western Balkans. So just a quick break, and then we'll be back.